All right, and welcome back to another episode of Phrasing FM, a podcast where I talk about languages and my experience building an app to learn them. I built Phrasing, a language learning application, to learn languages in a new and more effective manner. I wanted to learn more languages in my life, and I knew that I couldn't learn as much language as I wanted to with the tools that were currently available. And I've studied many languages in the past, and I've learned languages through traditional methods and through alternative methods. And I found the alternative methods to be a very different style of learning, and I've never really been able to articulate it. It's always been on the tip of my tongue, but I finally just came up with the perfect analogy to explain the difference between the two approaches. And so I pulled out my microphone and I'm recording now. There's construction going on next door. There's recording going on in the downstairs. So hopefully the noise is not too much of an issue. Hopefully it doesn't come through. But I'm very excited for this analogy because it just popped into my head. So what do I mean, first of all, with traditional versus alternative methods of language learning? The traditional methods of learning a language would be something like a textbook or like a course that you sign up and you take, something that has a Unit 1. We're going to talk about greetings. Unit 2, the present tense. You go through all these different conjugation tables. You learn all these grammar rules and you learn them in a structured, sanitary order. This is how most people have learned languages for the past 50 or 100 years, but it's not the only way to learn a language. There are plenty of alternative methods. And some of those alternative methods are things like spaced repetition or comprehensible input or language acquisition, basically watching content until you eventually internalize the language, or using flashcards where you're using an algorithm to learn words in the most efficient order possible, the most efficient manner possible. And now there's also phrasing, a way to learn a language that kind of combines these two. So it is a spaced repetition based learning method, but it works with really long, complex sentences, which gives you some of this language acquisition. You can start to acquire the basics while you use spaced repetition for stuff that really needs spaced repetition. So it kind of marries the two ideas. And so when you learn, let's see how to explain this analogy. I'll just set up the two different camps, the two different styles of learning a language. When you are learning a language with the alternative methods, it's kind of like painting. As you learn the language, you're getting a really rough idea of just some basics. And this is kind of like the sketch. When an artist or when a painter makes a painting, they first sketch it out. So it's just these charcoal lines. It's just the vague shape, but you can kind of start to see what the image is going to look like. You can see what it will eventually be. Then the painter will add base colors, and it's just the big, bold colors. The language kind of starts to take shape a little, I'm gonna mix up saying the language with the painting, but the painting starts to take shape a little bit more. Then they might add some highlights, then some details, then some line works, then some fine work at the end, and then at the end you have this fully rendered image. And when you're learning a language via any of these alternative methods, it's a lot the same thing. When you're starting, it's just this rough sketch. There's no real detail to it. There's no real substance. You can't really say anything. You can't really understand anything, but you have this good lay of the land. You have a good idea of what the language looks like. You have this outline. You have this sketch in your head. And as you continue, now you get these broad swaths of color, and all of a sudden you can kind of stumble your way around through a bit of the language. And then over time, you're refining. You're adding all of these highlights and details and shadows and fine details until eventually you can speak the language. So the reason I really like this analogy is when comparing it to traditional methods are a lot like printing a picture. So how a printer prints out a picture. It goes line by line, and it puts down every single dot of color in the perfectly rendered position that it should be. So as the image is coming out, it starts from the very top left corner, and then it does the very top row, and that row is perfect. You now have your greetings done. Then it goes on to the next row, and this is going to be your present tense conjugation of the verb to be. And so you're going to get that second row just perfectly crystallized. You want to get that down pat, make sure you understand it, all of the different details, the highlights, the lines, the everything. You want to make sure to fill that in perfectly before you go to row number 3, and that might be regular verbs or adjective conjugations. Who knows? But you're going to go through line by line and you're going to try to build up this language. Now, this has some benefits, and it does feel a lot faster in some regards because all of a sudden you can have these conversations, you can construct sentences in the language, you can say things, you can understand things, but you can only understand things in this domain that you have crystallized. You can only see the image that you have printed thus far, which, this sounds great. Why is that a problem? Just continue printing the rest of the image, and then you're going to have everything and you're going to get there faster. Printing a picture is faster than painting a picture. The reason I really like this analogy is because traditional methods are like printing a picture, but you only have enough ink to print the first 10 or 20% of the picture. Because inevitably, when you use a traditional language learning method, you're going to reach the end of your books. You're going to reach the end of your courses. You're going to reach the end of whatever it is that you're studying because there's only a finite amount of material out there. And I've reached the end of this material in many different languages. And I promise it's there for all of the languages, for French, for Japanese, for Spanish, any of these larger languages. You will eventually reach the end of the learning materials that you started in the traditional course, and you will not be fluent in the language. You finish these things and it's just, okay, now go learn the language, and you're sitting there confused, holding the bill like, wait, I thought that's what we've been doing this entire time. What have we been doing if not learning the language? But the thing is, you're getting this fully detailed, fully rasterized, fully complete picture of the beginning of the picture, which inevitably you have to learn how to then fill in the rest of the picture. And so what you start to do is you start to sketch out the rest of the picture, and you start to fill in the highlights or the base colors, and then you add the highlights and the details. And everybody who eventually learns a language, even if they started doing it with a traditional approach, they have to go in and do this painter style of finishing the language. And you end up having to go through this process anyways. And then you end up with this weird kind of mix of languages where there's this one part of the picture, there's this one part of your language that's perfectly crystallized, that you understand really good, that you're really, really good at. But then most of the picture is just this weird sketch and base colors that you never really finished. And you just keep pointing people to that part of the picture that you printed, and you're like, look, this part is really good. This part is really, really good. I'm struggling with, the other 80% of the picture, but it's coming together, and you just end up in this weird state. Whereas if you start to learn the language from the beginning, it feels a lot slower in the beginning because you're not getting this perfectly rasterized image. For example, I've been learning multiple of these languages now, like Turkish. For example, I've been learning a lot of Turkish now for maybe a year, and I still can't really say anything in Turkish. I understand quite a bit, and I understand quite a bit of the grammar, and even some of the sentence structure is starting to make sense. And I can maybe come up with individual conjugations of words, which, to be fair, in Turkish can end up being entire sentences. But I would struggle to formulate, normal, coherent sentences. And that's fine, because what I've done is I've sketched out a large portion of the language. And that's not a fully complete picture. There's still a lot of work that I need to do. I would say right now I'm starting to put in those base colors in Turkish. So I feel like I have a good sketch. And I feel like just now I'm starting to add the base colors to it, at which point I feel like I'll be able to have simple exchanges in Turkish, start to say things in Turkish, start to understand Turkish here and there. And I know that because I feel like that's where I am with Croatian. Croatian is an Indo-European language. It's just a little bit more familiar to me. I've done just as much Turkish as I have Croatian, and I'm just further along in Croatian. So I would say Turkish is taking me about twice as long to make progress, just because Croatian, it's familiar, the sentence structure is familiar, the way they say things is familiar, where Turkish, there's a lot more foreign things to learn. And I think having this analogy and finally being able to verbalize this analogy, at least in my head, just something just clicked where that's why it's okay. That's how it feels. It feels like I've sketched out this entire language. I just have a couple pencil scratches. They're all very loose. There's no real color in the image, but I have an understanding of the language as a whole. And if I see like written Turkish, if I see Reddit posts, or if somebody sends me a message in Turkish, I can kind of get the gist of it and I can see how the sentence fits together. I know which parts are the verbs and which parts are the nouns and which parts are the adjectives and the objects, and this understanding of just the structure of the language. And I don't mean exactly sentence structure. I'm missing the words here, but the idea of just having a sketch of the language is really apt for how I feel about Turkish. And adding these base colors in is a really apt analogy for how I feel about Croatian. So in these languages I'm learning with these alternative methods, I feel like it's much more this painterly style of do the whole image and just go through step by step. Get a good sketch, lay out everything, put the base colors on, get an idea of the colors that are going to be there. Then start to add in the highlight. And you're going to have to do this anyways in a language anyways. And just doing it from the beginning helps you avoid this position that you get in where you have a really solid, really crystal understanding of this really small corner of the language that just leaves you feeling like you can't progress there, but you can't draw in the picture because you don't have a sketch of the whole thing and you don't know how it's all going to look, but your language is too good now because you have this clear crystal understanding of this corner of it. So anything that isn't clear just feels very foreign, and it's just a very awkward position to be in when you want to go really get fluent in a language. So I feel like I'm really setting myself up for success. I feel like I'm really doing the work that I would need to do in languages that I learned in a traditional way eventually, just in the beginning of the process. So I'm starting with this process that everybody goes through after finishing the courses and the books and the textbooks and everything. Anyways, so that's the analogy of learning the language, the traditional method versus the alternative method. The traditional method is like starting to print a picture, but you only have so much ink, and then trying to paint the rest of the picture that you just printed. And it's never going to match perfectly. There's always going to be this disconnect. It seems super efficient in the beginning, but because, you're printing something and printing is so much faster. But if you printed half of a picture and then painted, or even, sorry, if you printed a quarter of the picture and then you painted the other 75%, it's not going to look as good. It's not going to be as seamless. It's not going to fit together as well as if you just painted the entire image from the beginning, which is what a lot of these alternative language learning methods do, such as Anki, such as Dreaming Spanish, such as Comprehensible Input, and such as phrasing. So if you are learning languages in alternative methods, if you have finished all of your language learning textbooks or you finished the language learning courses and you don't know how to improve, if any of this resonates with you, hopefully this analogy helps you a little bit, because for me, it really crystallized how I'm feeling about learning languages and what it feels like to learn a language with these alternative methods. And hopefully it helps you as well when you go to learn via these alternative methods, to feel more comfortable with your progress, to be able to map it better, because you do make progress, and you do make progress, I feel, just as quickly, but it's much less visible progress. It's not as immediate of progress. Over time, you do get to these points where you're putting together large pieces of the language at one time. I know I've learned a language through spaced repetition in the past, and it's just like almost overnight, you go from understanding nothing to just being able to speak the language. And I don't mean overnight using the method. I was using spaced repetition to learn Portuguese for several months. And the whole time I couldn't understand anything. I couldn't say anything. It just wasn't clicking. But I just kind of kept doing my spaced repetition because I found a habit that really worked for me in my day, and I wasn't overly invested in it. And then just one day I was sitting at a table with a bunch of Brazilians and Portuguese, and they were talking, and I made a comment in Portuguese in their conversation, and they all turned around and looked at me and were like, wait, what? And I was like, wait, what? I was following their conversation and I contributed to the conversation in Portuguese, and that just kind of came out of nowhere. It's not like I started being able to say hi out, how are you, have these awkward conversations, eventually grow my grammar and eventually grow my vocabulary. No, I just was using spaced repetition. I mapped out the language. I got a good feel for it. And then eventually I put in enough base colors to be able to get the gist and to contribute. And to me, it's just yeah, it's a great way to describe how it feels like to use these methods. If you want to try learning a language like a painter, then consider giving phrasing a try. Phrasing.app. It's an app that I've been building now for over 3 years to learn and maintain multiple languages. It supports over 90 languages, over 40 dialects, and I believe it is the best way to learn a language. So give it a try. Thanks for listening. Ciao.